Hey, welcome to another live stream. It's been a couple weeks since we've been doing this, and it'll probably be another couple of weeks before the next one, as next week is Salt Lake Comic Con. So if you want to come up and see me at Salt Lake Comic Con, my panel schedule will be on my blog at bryanyoungfiction.com. And I'm doing a lot of panels, mostly Star Wars, mostly podcasts. I'm doing 3 live podcasts of totally different shows. But at any point you catch me, I'm more than happy to ask questions. I am doing a signing, so if you have books of mine you'd like to bring and have me sign, or I'll have some on sale, that's definitely something we'll be doing at the convention. Had a lot of questions in the last couple of weeks, and we're going to go through them one at a time. The first one is from DJ Rudd, and he asks, names are hard. I find I can't make any sort of start on something until I have a character and place, the character and place names down. I try and pick names that make sense in the context of the story and to differentiate them enough that a reader wouldn't get confused or irked. I've heard professional writers say that they do placeholder names until they have something definite. Do I have a naming strategy, or are there any tips on that? I have that same problem where I have problems naming the characters until I can start working on something, but I do definitely use placeholders. There was a screenplay I worked on one time where we just couldn't get the names of the characters right, but it was 3 men and a woman who were the leads, and in order to just start writing, I named them after the Fantastic Four. So it was like Richard, Johnny, Ben, and Sue. I hated those names, but they were names that I could use to get through the story. Other times, I will, sometimes when I'm writing, I think about using a specific actor, usually a dead actor, and so I'll toss their names in there. So sometimes I'll have stories that start with Cary Grant or Humphrey Bogart or that sort of thing. When I'm actually sitting down to kind of pick the final names for how a character or a place is supposed to be, I think about what sort of visual imagery that character name might evoke. So if I want you to think that a character is going to feel very, say, Irish, I might name them O'Malley. Or if I wanted to give you the idea they're a little bit more Spanish or Latino or something like that, I might go look for names that are more common in Spanish. Or Arabic is a place where I'll find names to try to like give them some sort of a geographic cohesion. The sci-fi serial I'm working on right now, all of the characters from this one particular planet, all of their last names come from types of birds or different words for aspects of wind. So it's something that I kind of decided that's the deal with this society, and that's how that was going to work. And so that's worked really well, because every time I need to name something new or I need to name a new character, I know that I'm looking for types of birds or aspects of the wind. So that way I have people like there's a character named Lyra Redtail, there's another character named Quentin Zephyr, there's another character named Finch, another one named things of that nature. The fighter squadrons they're in have names like that. So there's Sparrowhawks and Griffinhawks and Night Owls and Skybirds and things like that. Things that kind of promote or give you the idea of a society that has a lot of connection to nature, a lot of connection to flying, and a lot of connection to the sky and wind. So I kind of have to look at things like that. If you're naming dwarves, are really interesting in that regard too, right? Dwarves, when working on a fantasy book, it's like you want things, names that feel earthen and earthy. So those are definitely things I take into account when I'm trying to name things. But I'm not above using temporary names and changing them through the drafts until there's something until they're absolutely right. So the next question is from Dawn Pink, and she asks, "What have I done to study? What have I studied to learn the craft of writing? What material would you recommend to people looking to improve?" There's a lot of stuff I've studied before I answer this question, actually, let me remind people, if you have other questions and like to ask them live, please do so in the chat box here. If we're live, please do it in the chat box. If we're not live, if you're watching this on YouTube or somewhere else, leave it in the comments and I will try to find it. In fact, all the questions that I have so far for this one have come from the YouTube comments of the last video, so just bear that in mind. So things I've studied to learn the craft of writing. One of the biggest ones has been screenwriting books, to be honest. Screenwriting is where I got my I cut my teeth in screenwriting. All of my prose writing originally came from high school, and I took every creative writing class I could get my hands on. It was creative writing, it was English, it was history, it was classes like that. Those are the things that I learned my craft initially, and then I kind of poured myself into screenwriting, and there are a lot of really great assets for screenplays. The book that I think kind of helps the most, that I go back to and kind of read every time I'm plotting a new story, is Robert McKee's Story. And that's every time I'm plotting any story, whether the format is screenwriting, whether the format is a short story, whether the format is a novel. Robert McKee's Story helps you understand and break down the building blocks of what makes a story work. So that's theme and the way scenes work and how drama builds and how you can come to that climax that you need, but also what are the academic notions behind things that would be considered non-plot or things of that nature. So Robert McKee's Story is like a huge one, and that's one I tell people all the time. The other ones I recommend to everybody for everything, and so if you've heard these before from me, I'm sorry, but William Goldman, who wrote The Princess Bride, both the book and the movie, and a whole host of other movies like Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid and All the President's Men, The Marathon Man, and the books that a couple of those were based on. He wrote two books. The first one was called Adventures in the Screen Trade, and the second one was called Which Lie Did I Tell? More Adventures in the Screen Trade. And both those books are really fascinating for a couple of reasons. One, not just because he takes you through screenwriting, but he takes you through his story process and what works for him and how he's able to put these things together and how he's able to take anecdotes from his life and how they apply into his stories and how business concerns affect the stories. It's really fascinating reading, and it permeates this creativity. So when I read it, even if I'm not working on a screenplay, it makes me feel creative to read it. Other books of that nature, Stephen King's On Writing was a really huge one. Like reading any book by any writer about writing. Ernest Hemingway's On Writing was really fascinating. They took sort of information from all of his letters and things like that, and kind of compiled it into, writing advice, and that was all super helpful for me. Other places like so there's books like this. I've got one here, like the Creative Writer's Notebook, and this is a book that has like sort of it has information about various writers and what their styles were like and what they were known for. So this is about James Joyce. And then it has like, here is the interior monologue. Here is something that James Joyce was known for, and here are the really things that make that interesting. So you go through and you kind of do these all as worksheets. And, here's like Finnegan's Wake. Here's how he used wordplay in Finnegan's Wake. Why can't you go through and try things like that, or describe family members, because that's what goes through these. And this is something I do even still. This is something that's still like this is Virginia Woolf and Oscar Wilde, and it's something that I think is interesting, just to kind of like exercise those muscles. Because you kind of get trapped. You can get trapped working in a specific place or admiring a specific writer and getting things like that that kind of force you to grow outside of the things that you know. Another one was the I want to say the New York Creative Writing Academy School. They put out a book that was sort of a textbook where it was like an essay, and in the middle of the essays were like challenges for what their course would be if you were taking the class like it was homework. And I went through and did all of those, and I lots of books like that. I don't think they all necessarily have the right answers, but by going through and doing those and treating them like homework almost, it showed me what I liked and what I didn't like about certain techniques, and so that really helped me hone my craft and help me understand what some writers were doing and why I did or why I didn't like it, and so I was able to to advance my craft a little more. So that's the sort of material I would recommend looking to improve. The other thing is just read books. Read lots and lots and lots of books and figure out what it is you do like about something and what it is you don't like. It's really important to be able to pinpoint that back and forth, what you like, what you don't like. So the next question, in my last video I mentioned a coffee shop, and this person asks, I've heard several writers say that they write at coffee shops. Do I find it's better to physically leave the house to write, or write in a particular room, or to maintain some sort of separation of your writing and your daily concerns? There's a video you should look up, and it's John Cleese on the nature of creativity. And he says that writers need to create what he calls an oasis of time and an oasis of space. So really, what is writing doing but freeing yourselves of all the other distractions and just thinking, pondering, what if? What would happen if this? What would happen if that? And that's really hard to do if your phone's ringing, if you're on your email, if you're on Facebook, if you're worried about social media, if you've got kids coming in the room all the time. Like, it's really hard. So you need to find a way to create a space. And it doesn't matter if that space is at a coffee shop. It doesn't matter if that space is in an office like I'm in now. And I've been locked in this room for like 2 days trying to hit deadlines. And, the door's closed. People know if the door is closed that I'm working. I've created this oasis of space, and it's a really beautiful oasis of space. I've had my record player going the whole time. I'm surrounded by my books. I've got my... I'll even show you. I've got my my shelves with all of the books and magazines I've published things in. I've got my record player. I've been listening to all of the Attack of the Clones, not Attack of the Clones, all the Star Wars soundtracks, because I've got them all. I think I'm on right now. Let's see, all my role-playing books. Oh, the records are down there. So I'm on Revenge of the Sith right now. There's the cover to the original art for the cover to Operation Montauk, and then I've got all kinds of books up there and some Star Wars toys and my Star Wars books. And anyway, that's the space that I've kind of locked myself in for the last couple of days, and it's because I do need that separation from my daily life and my daily concerns. The other thing is important is carving out that time to have those separations. When I go to the coffee shop, sometimes it can be noisy, sometimes it can be distracting, but that's part of why I go. I'll try to head out of the house by 6 every morning and get a couple of hours in before I go to the day job. So that's kind of absolutely important, I think. And then the last question I've got, unless you have any here in the chat room, he says, I've watched Dave Filoni's extended Star Wars show interview the other day, and he said he never watches Star Wars to get inspired about Star Wars. He watches old films from all sorts of genres and listens to 50s pop and classical music instead to try to expand the contributing influences on the story and open it up to new possibilities. What's your view on doing that? Is it less of a concern with original works like yours as opposed to playing in somebody else's sandbox? Now, this is obviously something, if any of you keep up with me, every other week I do a column on StarWars.com called The Cinema Behind Star Wars. And I kind of pinpoint these influences that people like Dave Filoni and George Lucas and the other directors were drawing from when they were working on Star Wars. And for me, that's made that's introduced me to a lot of stuff that's influencing me generally. Like Kurosawa is a constant theme through my work. Obviously, like some of the things that I've soaked in through Star Wars or learned as I got behind Star Wars have definitely soaked in through me. But being able to trace back, say, like Star Wars to American Graffiti to THX 1138 to the short films that George Lucas was watching when he was working on Star Wars, you kind of get a picture of what it is, what the sum of the parts are that influence a writer and a storyteller. And I don't think that's a danger at all. I think you have to do that. I think you have to soak things in. And we could all read the same book. We could all sit down and read Don Quixote, or we could all sit down and watch Raiders of the Lost Ark. And the things in our personal tastes that make those stories interesting are going to be different. So one of the things I love about Raiders of the Lost Ark is the breathless pacing and the dialogue, the way it tells stories around what's going on. But for you, the thing that might be interesting about Raiders of the Lost Ark for you is the structure, the very rigid structure, so that every 10 minutes you're turning on a dime as far as the story's concerned. And you can take the influence from Raiders of the Lost Ark and apply it to your story in a completely different way than I would for mine. And so we all process things individually and differently. So I don't think it's a concern to say we should consume art and use that art to inspire us and in turn create our own art, because I think that's just the way it is. That's the way it works. No one is objective. There's no such thing as objectivity. And we are all sponges for everything that we consume, which is part of why you need to consume so much. If you wanted to write fantasy and all you read was fantasy books, you're not going to bring anything new to fantasy. But if you read fantasy books and you want to write a fantasy book, and you go through and you start reading history books, if you start reading nonfiction, if you start reading mystery novels, if you start reading science fiction, and see what you could bring, see what you can smuggle from different genres and bring it into fantasy, you're going to be able to take your influences and give us something new with fantasy. So I think that part of the equation is important, and not just important, but I think it's vital. So we haven't had any more questions on here, and those are the questions I had from last week. So hopefully you guys will have some more questions for me next time. Like I said, I'll be at Salt Lake Comic Con this week, so I'd be happy to meet with anybody or talk to anybody as you find me. My schedule will be posted up on BryanYoungFiction.com. I'm still working on my Patreon. In fact, as soon as I'm done with this, I've got to put the last few hundred words on my Patreon short story for August, and then that'll probably be out in the next day or two. If you want to support me there, even just $1 will get you the short story every month. Last month was a really great short story about a dragon. This month it's a sci-fi western. It looks like next month is probably going to be literary fiction. And any support you could offer me there, if you find these helpful, even that $1 for that short story over on Patreon, which is patreon.com/Swankmatron, would be incredibly helpful in me taking the next step as a writer. If you want to follow me on Twitter, I'm at Swankmatron, and I hope that you all keep writing, and let me know what other questions you have. So until next time.